I need to share this story because what's been happening to me over the past 8 years has fundamentally changed how I view reality. I'm 27 years old now, and I've finally connected the dots on something that's been following me since I was a teenager. I wish I hadn't figured it out. Some things are better left unknown. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a quiet neighborhood tucked into the hills on the east side. My family lived comfortably in a 2-story house with a finished basement that my dad had converted into a home gym. He'd spent a summer installing proper equipment and covering one entire wall with floor-to-ceiling mirrors. That detail matters for what comes later. The first strange thing happened when I was 19, home from the University of Washington for winter break. It was late December, maybe a week before Christmas. Around 11 p.m., after everyone had gone to bed, I headed down to the basement to work out and clear my head after a stressful semester. The basement always had this particular atmosphere at night. It was cooler than the rest of the house, and the overhead light cast long shadows across the equipment. Sometimes I'd get this unsettling feeling, like someone was watching from the darker corners, but I always chalked that up to being tired. I was doing bicep curls, standing about 6 feet from the mirror wall, when something in the reflection caught my attention. Behind me in the far corner near the water heater, there was a faint red light, just a pinpoint, like an LED indicator. Except there was nothing over there that should have been producing light. I set down the weights and spun around. Nothing. Just the water heater, some boxes, and my dad's tool chest. The corner was completely dark. I stood there for a solid minute, but there was no red light at all. When I turned back to face the mirror, the light was gone from the reflection too. I tried to rationalize it, spent 10 minutes trying to recreate it from different angles. Nothing. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned it to my parents. My mom dismissed it, but my dad got this concerned look. He asked specific questions about exactly where I'd been standing and what time it was. 2 days later, I noticed he'd completely rearranged things in that corner of the basement. When I asked why, he said he was just cleaning, but his tone was off. Too casual, like he'd rehearsed the answer. Years later, I asked him again what he'd found that day. He still won't give me a straight answer. But I know he found something in that corner. Whatever was causing that red light in the mirror, he removed it and never told me what it was. That silence has haunted me ever since. 3 years passed. I graduated, got a job at a marketing firm downtown, and moved into a studio apartment on the 4th floor of an older building near Hawthorne. I'd been there about 6 months when the second incident occurred. It was a Thursday night in October. I was on a video chat with my girlfriend Emily when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide and she asked, "Is someone else in your apartment?" I said no, of course not. But she insisted she'd just seen someone walk behind me. "Not a shadow," she said, "an actual person." I turned around and checked every corner of my small apartment. Nobody there. Door locked, windows closed 4 stories up. We laughed it off as a video glitch. Technology does weird things sometimes. But then it happened again 2 weeks later during a call with my mom. She asked if someone had just walked through my apartment. This time, the figure had appeared to be standing in my bathroom doorway for several seconds. When it happened a third time during a work video conference, I started to really worry. My colleague Sarah mentioned it casually, almost as a joke. But I wasn't laughing. I became obsessed with figuring it out. I set up my phone to record continuously while I was at work. Hours of footage showed nothing. I checked every corner, every closet, even had my landlord inspect for hidden wiring. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he checked anyway. Found nothing unusual. The incidents continued for 2 months. Always on video calls. Always the same description. A figure moving in the background, standing in doorways, walking through my space. But never visible to me, never captured on my own recordings, and never there when I physically turned to look. Then I installed blackout curtains because the street lights were keeping me awake. After that, the sightings stopped. Nobody mentioned seeing anything unusual anymore. Whether the curtains solved it or the timing was coincidental, I'll never know. But I was grateful, at least for a while.
Last year, everything escalated in a way I never could have anticipated. Emily and I had been together nearly 3 years by then. Things were getting serious. We'd talked about moving in together, about long-term plans, about the future. So when we decided to take a trip to Vancouver for a long weekend in July, it felt like a natural next step. Just a simple getaway to reconnect. We drove up Friday morning, crossed the border, and checked into a hotel downtown. Vancouver in summer is beautiful. The weather was perfect, and we spent the first day just wandering around being tourists, eating good food, enjoying the change of scenery. Everything felt normal, happy. Saturday, we went to Gastown to see the famous steam clock. It was crowded with tourists and street performers. We were standing maybe 20 feet from the clock, waiting for it to do its hourly steam whistle, when I noticed someone across the street. It was a woman, probably in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was dressed all in black, which stood out because everyone else was in bright summer clothes. But what really caught my attention was the camera she was holding. A professional DSLR with a telephoto lens. And she was pointing it directly at us. Now, Vancouver's a tourist city. People take photos everywhere. I wouldn't normally think twice about it, but something about her posture, about the way she was standing so still and focused, made me watch her more carefully. She wasn't photographing the clock or the historic buildings or the street performers. The camera was aimed at us, at me specifically, or at least that's how it felt. I watched her for maybe 30 seconds. The camera never moved from her face. She never lowered it to check the photos or adjust settings. She just kept it trained in our direction. Emily asked what I was looking at, pulling my attention away for just a moment. When I pointed back across the street, the woman was already walking away, moving quickly through the crowd. That was weird, Emily said, but she didn't seem too concerned. Probably just some amateur photographer being creepy, we decided. We continued our day, walking down to the waterfront, trying to enjoy our vacation. But I couldn't shake the image of that woman and her camera. It nagged at me. The next morning, we decided to have brunch at this cafe near Stanley Park. It was one of those trendy spots with exposed brick and locally sourced everything. We got a table by the window and were just settling in when I looked out at the street. She was there. The same woman, same black clothes, same camera, same stance. Standing across the street, maybe 40 feet away, camera raised and pointed directly at our table. This time I was sure. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some random photographer. This woman was following us, following me. I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. Emily asked what was wrong, her voice rising with alarm. I didn't answer. I just bolted for the door, pushed past other customers, ignoring their startled looks. By the time I made it outside and across the street, weaving through weekend traffic, the woman had vanished, just gone. I spun around, checking every direction, but there were too many people. When I got back to the cafe, Emily was scared, really scared. She wanted to know what was going on, and I told her everything. About the woman yesterday, about how I'd just seen her again. Emily wanted to call the police, but what would we tell them? A woman took photos on a public street? That's not illegal. We decided to cut our trip short. We packed up that afternoon and drove home. Both of us quiet and tense during the entire 3-hour drive. The romantic getaway had turned into something unsettling and wrong. Back in Portland, I couldn't let it go. My brain kept spinning, trying to make connections. The red light in the basement mirror 8 years ago. The figures people kept seeing behind me on video calls. And now this woman in Vancouver blatantly following us with a camera. These things had to be connected. They had to be. I started researching obsessively. I spent hours reading about surveillance techniques, about stalking cases, about hidden cameras. That's when I stumbled across something called through-the-lens surveillance. It's a technique where stalkers position themselves to watch their targets through reflective surfaces, using the physics of mirrors and glass to observe someone without being obviously present in the same space. It hit me like a freight train. The basement mirror, the red light that was only visible in the reflection, not when I looked directly at the corner. What if someone had been watching me through that mirror? What if there'd been a camera set up in a way that used the mirror's reflection to spy on the basement? The next day, I drove to my parents' house. I told them I needed to check something in the basement. My dad looked concerned but didn't stop me. I went down there with a flashlight, determined to find answers. I got down on my hands and knees and examined every inch of that wall behind where the boxes used to be. And then I found it. A tiny hole drilled through the drywall, right at eye level if someone was standing in the storage area. The hole was maybe the diameter of a pencil, carefully drilled, and then painted over to blend in with the wall. But I could see it when I really looked, when I knew what I was searching for. I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. My dad came down, saw me on the floor examining the wall, and his face went completely pale. He walked over slowly and sat down on the weight bench, suddenly looking much older than his 58 years. He told me everything. 8 years ago, after I'd mentioned the red light, he'd come down here and found a small, professional-grade camera system hidden in the storage area. Someone had drilled through from the outside basement window well, installed the equipment, then carefully patched and painted over their entry point. The camera had been positioned to watch the entire basement through the mirror's reflection. Clever, really. Terrifying, but clever. My dad had removed everything and reported it to the police. But they'd told him what I already suspected they would say. Without knowing who installed it, when exactly it had been placed, or how long it had been active, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested it might have been equipment left behind by a previous owner, maybe an old security system that was never properly removed. But my dad knew better, and so did I. This was intentional. This was targeted. Someone had specifically set up surveillance in our home to watch me or watch my family. And if they'd done it once, who's to say they hadn't done it again? In different ways, in different places. The figures people saw behind me on video calls suddenly made more sense. What if someone had been in my apartment, but positioned in a way that they were only visible through the camera's lens? The woman in Vancouver was different, though. That was brazen. That was someone who wanted me to know I was being watched. Last month, I found a package outside my apartment door. A small padded envelope with no return address, just my name printed on a generic label. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. I should have called the police, but I plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained a single folder labeled with an 8-year date range. Inside were hundreds, maybe thousands of photos. All of me. Photos of me at work, at the grocery store, at the gym, walking my friend's dog, getting coffee, at my parents' house, at concerts, at the beach. Every photo taken from a distance without my knowledge. The dates ranged from 8 years ago to 3 weeks before I received the package. 8 years. Someone had been documenting my entire adult life. Through high school, college, jobs, relationships, apartment moves, they'd tracked every phase of my life. The most recent photo broke me. Taken from across the street, showing me sitting on my couch visible through my window. I'm looking at my phone, and on my phone screen, barely but definitely visible in the high-resolution image, is the same photo I'm looking at. They'd captured the exact moment I discovered I was being watched. That's when I understood. This was a message. Whoever had been watching me for 8 years wanted me to know. They wanted me to understand they were always there, always one step ahead. They wanted me to feel powerless. I filed a police report and showed them everything. They were sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do. No direct threats had been made. They told me to install security and be aware of my surroundings. Advice that felt inadequate. I've moved twice since then. Installed cameras, changed routines, closed social media. I've become hyper-vigilant about every reflection, every window, every stranger with a camera. But I still see it sometimes. That faint red light. In gym mirrors, in store window reflections, in dark corners. Maybe it's paranoia, but maybe not. Maybe they're still watching. Maybe they'll never stop. I'm sharing this because people need to know this happens. There are people who will watch you, follow you, document your life without your knowledge, for reasons you may never understand. If you've experienced anything similar, unexplained lights and reflections, people seeing things behind you on video calls, or the persistent feeling of being observed, take it seriously. I don't know who's doing this, or if I'll ever find out. I don't know if I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. But I know I'm not alone. There are others living with this same fear, this same violation. And if that's you, if you're recognizing yourself in my story, you're not alone either. Stay vigilant. Check your mirrors. Check your reflections. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Never assume that just because you can't see someone watching, that means nobody is. Because sometimes the watcher is right there in the mirror, hiding in the reflection, invisible, until you know exactly where to look.